Unit 6, the Revolutionary War, Lesson 6. How did the United States move into Western lands? Set the scene. If you received a large piece of new land, what would you do with it? After gaining new lands in the West following the Revolution, the United States government had to find ways to manage them. What plans did Congress put in place as people moved west? Preview the lesson. Vocabulary. Territory. Noun. Land owned or controlled by a particular country. Policy. Noun. A plan for doing or managing something. Settling Western lands. The 1783 Treaty of Paris that ended the American Revolution gave the United States control of a large new territory between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. A territory is land owned or controlled by a particular country. Some settlers had moved into this area before the war, even though the British government had banned settlements west of the Appalachians in the Proclamation of 1763. After the British were defeated, even more settlers wanted to move west. Congress soon realized that it needed to create a new policy for settling Western lands. A policy is a plan for doing or managing something. So Congress passed the Land Ordinance of 1785. This ordinance sent surveyors or people who measure land to map and divide the territory into sections of land to be sold to settlers. It also set prices for the land. This policy was very successful, and over time, many people bought and moved to the Western lands. Caption. George Washington Center worked as a surveyor before the American Revolution. After Congress passed the Land Ordinance of 1785, surveyors measured the new Western territory. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Land sales led many people to move west. But how could the United States govern settlers who lived so far from the eastern states? The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 set up rules for governing new lands. It divided the area north of the Ohio River into territories that were run by appointed officials. Each territory had at least 5,000 free adult males. People in a territory could elect their own assembly and send a non voting representative to Congress. When the population reached 60,000, a territory could write its own constitution and apply for statehood. Eventually, 5 states were created in the Northwest Territory. The Northwest Ordinance placed these new states on an equal footing with the original states. This meant that new states could participate in national elections and assemblies. Eventually, 5 states were created in the Northwest Territory. The Northwest Ordinance placed these new states on an equal footing with the original states. This meant that new states could participate in national elections and assemblies. Citizens of these new states had the same rights as all other Americans. The ordinance also banned slavery in the Northwest Territory. The rights of American Indians. The Northwest Ordinance also had a policy for American Indians in the territories. It said that American Indians' property rights and liberty shall never be invaded or disturbed. However, settlers moved onto American Indian lands anyway. When American Indian groups resisted the settlers, the U.S. government sent soldiers to put down the resistance. Over time, many of these groups were defeated and forced to sell their land to the United States. Many American Indians began to move south or west as large numbers of settlers moved onto their land. Caption. Settlers increasingly moved into the Northwest Territory in the late 1700s. Summary. The U.S. government developed Western land policies that affected settlers, states, and American Indians. How did the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 affect the United States and many American Indian groups? Unit 6, The Revolutionary War. Lesson 7, how did people's views on slavery change after independence? Set the scene. The Declaration of Independence says that all people have the right to, quote, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, end quote. Yet, many African Americans remained enslaved after its signing. How did African Americans and others work to fulfill the ideal of freedom? Preview the lesson. Vocabulary. Abolish. Verb. To end. People. Harriet Tubman. Frederick Douglass. The call for freedom. The ideal of freedom announced in the Declaration of Independence did not really apply to everybody in the United States. Slavery was widespread, especially in the southern states. However, after independence, more and more people began to argue that enslaved African Americans should be freed. People called abolitionists wanted to abolish or end slavery. The Religious Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers, including many abolitionists, they believed everyone should be treated fairly. Prince Hall was one of the many former enslaved people who spoke out against slavery. After being freed by his owner after many years of service, he began an important leader among African Americans in Boston. In 1777, Hall and others sent a petition to the government of Massachusetts asking it to abolish slavery. The petition was denied. Mum Bet, who was born into slavery, believed that the ideals of the Declaration of Independence should apply to her too. In 1781, she took her owners to court in Massachusetts. In deciding the case, the court noted that the state's new constitution said all people were, quote, born free and equal, end quote. The court also decided that no state law had ever made slavery legal. Because of the court's decision, Bet was freed from slavery. She then changed her name and became known as Elizabeth Freeman. Caption: Prince Hall and Elizabeth Freeman believed that the ideal of freedom in the Declaration of Independence should apply to all Americans. Caption: Many people helped enslaved African Americans escape to freedom. This picture shows a school teacher helping an enslaved African escape from slavery. The debate over slavery. After gaining independence, the states began a debate about slavery that would continue for many years. Which states would allow slavery and which would not? Most northern states had banned slavery by 1790. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 banned slavery in new western states. Yet slavery was still an important part of southern states' economy, which relied on enslaved people to work on large plantations. People in southern states worried that if Congress had more members from free states than from slave states, the free states could vote to ban slavery everywhere. Proponents of slavery worked hard to make sure that there was always an equal number of free students and slave states. The struggle for freedom. In the 1800s, many abolitionists continued to fight against slavery. Harriet Tubman was a former enslaved person who helped others escape to freedom along the Underground Railroad. This was a secret system of travel from southern states to the northern states and Canada. After he gained his freedom, Frederick Douglass lectured and wrote about his life as an enslaved person. He also helped recruit African Americans to fight for the North during the Civil War, which was a war between the northern free states and southern slave states. During that war in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln declared that enslaved people in the states fighting against the North were free. In 1865, in addition to the U.S. Constitution, freed all enslaved people. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all enslaved people in the states. Caption: In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all enslaved people in the states fighting against the North to be free. Summary: The ideals in the Declaration of Independence changed the same way some people viewed slavery. How does the Declaration of Independence influence abolitionists?